everyone. Welcome back from that break. I am very excited to have Dr. Katie Welch joining us today, who she'll be discussing social emotional learning with us. Love that intro. Dr. Katie Welch has an extensive background doing professional development with educators, so we're super excited to have her here. She's worked with the U.S. Department of State, Cambridge University Press, and she is, in my opinion, most importantly, an active member, an active contributor to the TESOL community, meaning that she is getting out there and engaging with other language educators in a really meaningful way. So thanks, Katie. I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to be a part of this event. Thank you to the whole ESL Library team for putting this together. I have done conferences as part of my work through Text TESOL. I'm down here in Dallas, Texas, and we've done our fair share of conferences, and it's not easy. So kudos to the ESL Library team for putting this learning together for us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You saw my welcome screen there, something that I like to do just to get us kind of in the mood. If you have a chance, was hoping that you might be able to fill in the sentence starter that was there for us in the chat. Something good that has happened to me this week was. So if something good happened to you this week, we want to hear about it. So let's see, looks like Deanna just put in, this week I had 2 new students that wanted to learn Spanish to talk to their new friends in class. Oh, that's so sweet. Love that. Thank you for sharing. Would love to hear everyone else's something good. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to tell you a little bit about myself very briefly. Just a few stats. I mentioned to you that I'm down here in Texas. I have served on the executive board for Text TESOL 5 for a number of years, was served as president, past president, advertising, currently treasurer, and just enjoy being involved in the Texas TESOL scene and also TESOL internationally. I have a PhD in linguistics, and I work currently as a teacher trainer, but I'm a teacher myself. I have taught both in higher ed and in K-12. So if you're here from either of those groups, I stand in solidarity with you. And I have taught online and hybrid and flipped courses and face-to-face courses. So I was fortunate that when the pandemic hit, that was not my first experience teaching online. I have been teaching online for about 10 years. And today we're going to be talking about social emotional learning, both in online classrooms and face-to-face classrooms. So regardless of which context you're teaching in right now, I'm hoping that we can find some strategies that will work for you. Also, something I didn't mention here, but my graduate work prior to my linguistics PhD was actually in counseling. And so when we talk about social emotional learning, it really is a blend of a lot of my interests. Most recently, I was on faculty at a university here in the Dallas area, and I got to do some research around social emotional learning. So this is a topic that I really enjoy talking about. Okay, so we're going to start off this morning getting to know each other a little bit through, we're going to use a tool called Mentimeter. If you've ever used Mentimeter before, it's just an online polling tool. And so if you happen to have your handy dandy cell phone out, or you can pull up another tab in your browser and go to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And you can use the code up on the screen. We're going to vote which of these memes we most identify with right now. Jen was saying Menti rocks. Yes, we love Menti. So I've got a horse staircase over here with assignment expectations and student work. The middle one, we've got Titanic. I think we're a little bit too soon into the new school year for memes to be made, although I'm sure they're coming. So this one was based off of last year's school year. But if you were teaching last year, me at the start of the 2020-21 school year and me at the end of the 2020-21 school year. So that's the Titanic one. And then the horse drawing is the third one, where you see the start of semester is detailed and ornate, and then by the end of semester and finals, it's looking quite different. So which of these do you most identify with? If you'll go to menti.com, use the code 60114693, and you can go ahead and vote. And I'll share our results here in just a second. What do you think? 1, 2, or 3? Looks like the code is in the chat if you need that. I'm going to stop sharing real quick and switch and see. It looks like we've got people voting. Thank you so much for participating. Let's see what our results are. Oh, it's getting close. All right, looks like quite a few of us relate to that Titanic drawing where you start off fresh and wide-eyed and you end the year kind of looking tired. Oh, so many of you. Oh, yes. One of our folks, Karthik, I hope I said your name wrong, was asking if we can vote for all three. Yeah, I know it's a tough choice. It's a tough choice, but it looks like the Titanic may have been our winner. So thank you for participating. That was just a little something fun to get going. And also just to acknowledge that the past year has been tough. The past couple of years have been tough for us as educators because of the pandemic. It's nice when you can kind of bring some levity into the situation. Whoops, looks like I'm sharing the wrong screen. Give me 1 second to get back to our memes. There we go. All right. So thank you, first of all, for your work this past year. Those of you that are feeling that Titanic one, I'm right there with you. It's been rough. I think just acknowledging that has some power, lets us know, this has been a challenging year. And so we're going to be talking today about social emotional learning. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about adult learners, but if you teach in a K-12 environment, many of the things we talk about here would be relevant in a K-12 classroom as well. In fact, a lot of the things that we're talking about come out of K-12 classrooms that we're applying into adult spaces. So hang around even if you're in K-12. When we talk about social emotional learning, thinking about this past year has been tough for us as educators, also been very tough for our students. How can we approach this topic? It's very timely. So to get started, we need to talk about what is social emotional learning. What do we even mean by that? And so social emotional learning is a holistic approach to education. Sometimes this is called the missing piece of education because it's going beyond the academics and into social aspects of learning, emotional aspects of learning. This movement comes out of the K-12 world. It dates back to the 1960s, became a lot more popular in the 90s and into obviously present day. Social emotional learning was formalized in the 90s through an organization called CASEL. And so a lot of the stuff that we're going to look at today is based on work and research that has come out of this CASEL organization. CASEL stands for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Makes sense. And you have the CASEL 5, which is when people talk about what is social emotional learning, there are 5 components that are kind of the core of SEL. Now we're playing acronym fun here today because we have ESL, of course, which we all know is English as a second language, but we also have SEL, which is social emotional learning. So we're going to try not to get our acronyms confused here today. But let's talk about what are those core 5 components of SEL. So here is a basic definition. Social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults, again, we tend to think, oh, this is only for kids who are kind of in their developing years. But in reality, these are aspects of learning that apply to both children and also to adult learners. And so the first one is self-awareness. And that's acquiring and effectively applying the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions. So being able to understand your own emotions, self-awareness, and being able to manage and regulate yourself. Setting and achieving positive goals is self-management. So that's number 2 of the CASEL 5. Feeling and showing empathy for others is social awareness. So we're not just aware of ourselves, not just navel gazing and looking inward, but we're also aware of others and being able to show empathy for them. We have, related to that, relationship skills, which is the ability to not just have awareness of others, but be able to maintain and establish relationships with them, positive relationships. And then lastly, responsible decision making, which is kind of easily defined as make responsible decisions. So that comprises the Castle 5. Now, when we think about teaching and teaching English learners, we have a couple of ways of integrating SEL into ESL. One way is to have standalone lessons where our objective is to teach one aspect of the Castle 5. And so it could be that I want to teach a lesson on feelings. And of course, I could give the kind of grammatical aspects of forming a sentence, a well-structured sentence about feelings. We could talk about the vocabulary of feelings, but I could make my entire lesson about feelings. I could make an entire lesson about conflict resolution and try to think more about those relationship skills. And so my whole lesson could be just about one of these 5. Now, if you happen to be using the ESL Library curriculum right now, they have been putting a particular emphasis on these types of lessons recently. And so you can find in ESL Library a collection where if you say, you know what, I want to do something about self-awareness or social awareness, you can go and find a pre-made lesson that would fall into one of those categories. And so I want to just show you where you could find those real quick. If you go to materials and collections, and you can scroll down to academic subjects, they're in the middle bottom. And then if you'll scroll down again to the bottom of this page, you'll find social emotional learning. And what you'll find is a collection of lessons that are already made. And you see here, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and decision-making. That's the Castle 5. And so you can find ready-made lessons that would fall into each of those 5 categories. Now, that is one way to approach social emotional learning, and a good way, Those some great lessons in there. One of my favorites was about talking about feelings related to the pandemic. Very timely, very important. But there is another way to integrate social emotional learning into your lessons where it doesn't have to be a standalone lesson where you say, okay, I want to target this specific skill, such as conflict resolution. Instead, there is a way to infuse social emotional learning into everything you do in your class, any class that you're teaching, regardless of what the content is. So for example, if you're teaching on the past progressive and doing some sort of a grammar lesson, you can still have in mind social emotional learning. And so during our first part of our presentation today, we're going to be talking about, well, how do you do that? And there's 3 practices that we're going to use. But first, why? Why would we do that? Why would we do that? Well, the Aspen Institute said that, put simply, social and emotional development is not just about the skills that students and adults possess and deploy. So it's not just about that skill set. It is also about the features of the educational climate or setting itself, including culture and climate. And so what we do as teachers, the educational setting that we create for our students impacts social and emotional development. And so therefore we have to be very mindful about, okay, what kind of culture and climate am I creating for my students? Now, if you've been around the ESL world for a while, TESOL world, then you would probably have heard of the affective filter. This is a hypothesis by Stephen Krashen. It came along in the 1986, late 1980s, but still heavily impacts how we think about certain aspects of language acquisition, especially down here in Texas. You see this Krashen's ideas infused in our K-12 curriculum. So what is the affective filter? And what sometimes you'll hear that our goal as teachers is to lower the affective filter. What does that mean? So here I have my English learner and ready to learn, but this particular learner has a filter, a wall that's comprised of low motivation, poor self-esteem, and high anxiety. And so when you have any combination of those things, That's considered a raised affective filter. It's a block, like a mental block, and you can have a fantastic teacher, a fantastic lesson created, and they're getting lots of awesome language input, and yet the filter keeps it from being able to fully integrate into the learner's schema, and for them to really be able to internalize that learning, because they're stressed out. They're anxious, low self-esteem, they're not motivated. And so part of our goal as educators is to change the culture and climate of our classrooms to where we can lower that affective filter, make it so that wall, that mental block, is not there. So then as we give great learning experiences and language to them, that it seeps in, that it is internalized. And so that affective filter doesn't become an issue. And so we're going to talk today about how can we create that kind of culture and climate for our students. Okay, so there's 3 steps, 3 signature practices. Now, again, these are signature practices that work especially well in adult classrooms, but part of that also would work well in a K-12 classroom as well. So the first signature practice is to have a welcoming ritual that promotes activities for inclusion. So how you welcome your students into your classroom is very important. Second signature practice is having engaging practices, having engaging learning experiences that provide adult learners with opportunities for sense making of the material that you're teaching, but also brain breaks to give their brain a chance to relax, think, and be ready for learning. And then the third one, so we did 1, welcoming rituals, 2, engaging practices. The third signature practice is an optimistic closure that offers times for reflections and looking forward. So we're going to talk today about how could you integrate, regardless of what the content is that you're teaching. Again, you could do a standalone lesson on something related to SEL, but any lesson, you can add in these 3 practices and still hit some of those really important facets of SEL. So let's talk about welcoming rituals first. Welcoming rituals is thinking about the first 5 of class, the first 5 minutes of class. How do you welcome in your learners and set the tone and build community from the moment that they step foot in your classroom, whether face-to-face or virtual? Now, some of the things that, and you probably do some of these things, and if you have like something that you do to welcome in your learners, I'd love to hear about it in the chat. What is it that you specifically do to let them know, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to our learning community. So one thing, of course, just a basic thing is just calling each person by name as they come into the classroom, greeting them, making sure that you've taken the time to learn how to pronounce their name correctly. So that way you're able to communicate respect and care to them, valuing who they are as a person. And so this can happen on Zoom, obviously, with the hand waves that we do as people come into a Zoom room. Or if you're in a socially distanced classroom, we've got to start figuring out what our social distance greetings are going to be. Here's a few options in the right-hand corner: elbow bumps, foot shakes instead of handshakes. I don't know if that's going to be the new thing, or just wave. You know, we've gotten so used to doing our Zoom waves. Maybe we'll take that on in real life too. But anything to let your students know, I'm so glad that you are here. And sometimes this means making sure that we've arrived to class a little bit early and have gotten everything taken care of. So that way, instead of us being stressed out about getting our copies together or pulling up our PowerPoint or whatever it is, that we're making a priority to set that good culture and climate from the start. I put a picture of my horse meme down here at the bottom. One of the ways that I tried to show you how you might do this is by doing our little meme vote this morning as a way to just come into the class and be engaged first thing. Another way that you can do a welcoming ritual, the word ritual, implies that you're kind of doing the same thing so that students know what to expect. And that is very comforting from a social and emotional perspective for a student to come into an environment and know what to expect. It makes us feel safe when we're not wondering, well, what's going to happen today? And so one way that in the digital age that teachers are finding that they can kind of establish that safe space, that routine, is using these welcome screens at the beginning of a Zoom class. And so you saw I had one this morning that looked like this, and it has a little countdown timer with some happy music. This is one way to kind of set the tone for the class. Another way is to use sentence starters. Something good that happened to me this week was, and using the start of class to just check in with everyone, to start on a vibe where you're collaborating with each other and just engaging with them as human beings, as people, before necessarily diving into the content. It is always helpful when the welcoming ritual has something to do with what you're going to be doing that day, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing every day, just something to connect with the students. One welcoming ritual that I use is this feelings wheel, which I don't know if that's the official term for it, but I know if you Google feelings wheel, this is what's going to come up. And I have used this in my classes where I had literally pre-pandemic had a giant poster of this printed out, would have it up on the board, and then students would come up and put a very small sticky note pointing to wherever they were on the feelings chart that day. This was optional. Of course, students didn't have to do this, but it played two roles. One is that it provided them an opportunity to kind of do a self-check. How am I entering into this room? What energy am I bringing? Where am I currently in terms of my emotional state? I would often find that at the beginning of the semester, we were kind of in that yellow, happy part of the wheel. And then as we moved on into the later parts of the semester, we might get into some of the angry, fearful, kind of sad parts of the wheel. So it was helpful for students to be aware of kind of their own selves, but also for me to be aware of where are my students, who's in the room, and how are we feeling today, because that helps me to know what I need to do, the steps I need to do to help alleviate some of that stress or whatever it was that was coming into the room. Also, I just love this for a linguistic perspective. There's so many great words on here, so it's also an opportunity to help talk about the denotation of these words versus the connotation. So there's a lot you can do there. And you, of course, could do this feelings chart with emojis or something digital too. So another welcoming ritual option. Okay, and then another one is just doing some kind of community building can be a welcoming ritual. And you may be thinking, I have so much content to cover. Whatever it is that I'm teaching today, I just don't have time for these things. But this doesn't have to be a long, drawn out thing. Again, with the feelings chart, students as they walked in the room would put their Post-it if they chose and go sit down. It, maybe added 15 seconds. The Zoom screen was happening as students are logging in, so that's not taking any actual class time. Community building like this, maybe up to the first 5 minutes of class, you can ask students to, in some way, partner up with someone else and relationship build, which is one of our SEL skills, through some kind of conversation. So one way that ESL Library makes this super easy is if you go to resources and warm-ups and fillers, conversation questions, you can find, if you think, oh, I don't know, how do I, what questions would I use as kind of community building questions? You have hundreds of options here. This was a love option.
What is love?
What is love? I mean, that's a deep question.
Valentine's Day is on February 14th. Do you celebrate this holiday?
Okay, so these are kind of related to love and Valentine's Day. If you scroll down, there's actually a section on feelings. So you could go grab one of these.
What makes you happy? How do you feel today? What is the reason for that feeling? When is the last time you felt really tired?
When is the last time you felt really tired? That's a great kind of interesting community building question that you could have students pair up. You know, again, pre-pandemic, I might have done this with a stand up, hand up, pair up, which is where you have everyone stand up, put their hand in the air for a high five, and then they pair up with someone, and that's the partner. And it's kind of a random grouping of whoever they happen to high five as their partner. I think maybe now with social distancing, we may have to do air high fives or something like that. But this would be a great, quick community building exercise you could do at the beginning. You could choose a conversation starter here from ESL Library if you so chose. There were literally hundreds of options to choose from, or come up with your own as a great way to just start the class off with that positive culture and climate. Okay, let me check. I'm gonna see if anybody has. Just checking the chat real quick to see, do you rotate through rituals or try to keep one through a period of time? That's a great question. You know, for me, I think it's kind of a combination. There's some things that I want my students to always know. My classroom's always going to kind of, beginning of class is always going to contain this, whatever this is. So it could be a Zoom welcome screen. It could be the feelings chart. So that way it's kind of, there's the comfort in knowing we always do this. It also depends on how often, like if I was teaching a weekly class versus that might not get old quickly. Whereas if it was an everyday class, you may, Mondays do something, Tuesdays do something, Wednesdays do something. So I think it's up to your discretion. Certainly humans feel comfort in and safety in routine, but we also get bored easily and we like novelty. And so I think there's a balance there between those two. So great questions. Thank you for asking that, Cassandra. Appreciate that. Okay, so first kind of piece of the signature practices for SEL is welcoming rituals. So I gave you some ideas there. Maybe you have some others that you want to throw in the chat of something that might, maybe you're iterating off of one of my ideas and thinking, oh, I could do this. So welcoming rituals is number one. Number two is engaging practices. So we want to engage the brain as we're learning, of course, but also give it breaks. And so I want to talk a little bit about the breaks part first before we talk about the engaging the brain part. So here I've got a cat with a clock, which may seem strange, but this is because I witnessed a class over the summer that would take breaks using joke a clock, where they would stop in class and tell a joke. And it was just a way to kind of give the brain a break. So I've seen that be effective. You also just see this woman down here in the bottom corner stretching a little bit. And so I want to lean into that a little bit more. If you have been teaching online the past year, 2 years, you may have heard the term Zoom fatigue. You may have experienced Zoom fatigue. You may be in Zoom fatigue right now because you've been conferencing for a while. And the reality is that it is hard on our brain to be in an online environment. It's different than being in a face-to-face environment, although we need brain breaks in both environments, but especially online. Zoom fatigue is something that's kind of new, a new element for those of us who are teaching online. Why do we have Zoom fatigue? Well, part of it is that in Zoom, you have excessive amounts of close-up eye contact, and it's highly intense. We don't do that in face-to-face context, so it's kind of unusual to have this much eye contact. Another reason for Zoom fatigue is that you're seeing yourself, which is something that, again, when you're just living your life, you don't have a mirror in front of you all the time. And so you're not as aware of your own movements and gestures and whatever, your bad hair days and your good hair days. But online, when you see yourself, it is fatiguing. It can really wear your brain out because it's a lot of information that you're trying to figure out what to do with. So that's part of Zoom fatigue. Part of Zoom fatigue is just because if you're on video chat, you're not mobile, you're not up and around the room as you might be in a classroom where you are doing things like stand up, hand up, pair up, and moving about the classroom. And then the cognitive load is just higher in a video chat, just like right now. You're watching a PowerPoint presentation, you're watching my face is on the screen, we've got a chat going over here. And so it's just a lot for your brain to keep up with. And so, there's just a lot more cognitive load in the Zoom environment. Let's see, Lloyd was saying, sometimes seeing yourself can be too much of a good thing. That's 100% right. This Zoom fatigue, all of these findings are from the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab, which is a 2021 study, because you can imagine this is being heavily studied right now, just given the state of the world. But this is challenging for our learners, it's challenging for us. And so what can we do to combat Zoom fatigue if we're in an online environment, or just what can we do to really keep our learners' brains active and engaged throughout the learning in a face-to-face environment? Well, one thing you can do is brain breaks. So maybe you've heard of brain breaks before. This is just a short mental break that's taken at regular intervals during instruction. Just take a mental break. We all need those. It's designed, it seems counterintuitive. It's like, oh, I only have so much time to teach all this content, and I need every minute counts and every second counts. And so to provide a brain break feels like a waste of time. And yet, all this brain research, brain science, neuroscience is showing us how beneficial these types of breaks can be for students staying focused, being attentive, and even being motivated to learn. A brain break is not just a restroom break or a go grab a quick snack and join us break, although those things are very beneficial and we want to do those things, obviously. But a brain break is usually more than just, hey, we'll meet back in 5 minutes. Often brain breaks incorporate some kind of breathing exercises, because what we find is that, again, as our learners are engaged in our content, they may be bringing up the stresses of their daily life, the stresses of being an immigrant or a refugee in a different country. And so they may have activated, more often than not, their limbic system, which is kind of our survival center of our brain. And one thing that we can do to kind of counteract that is to just breathe. And by breathing, we relax the limbic system and we activate our parasympathetic nervous system. And so I have a colleague who teaches ESL here in the Dallas area, and she incorporates breathing exercises into every ESL class that she teaches because she has recognized that this gets her students into the right state of mind and their bodies into their right kind of frame to learn. Likewise, we can breathe to relax, but also you can do some brain breaks that involve movement. Now you could do like some total physical response or something like that, where it's language related, but you can also just do some quick exercises, stretches even with your class. We all have a midline that runs down the center of our body. It's invisible, obviously. This is a theoretical midline. And because the different hemispheres of our brain control the different parts of our body, anytime we cross the midline, like I just did just now, where I took my right hand and put it on the left side of my body, or my left hand on the right side of my body, anytime we cross the midline, we are causing our two hemispheres to need to communicate with each other. And it actually kind of engages those synapses in our brain in a way that wakes it up. And so if you find that your students are dragging, maybe you're teaching out into the void and not getting much back, this might be a great time for a brain break where you say, okay, let's everyone stand up together and let's reach across and reach across. And you may feel like you're an aerobics instructor, but it's so good for the brain. So just as an example of that, I'm going to invite you to breathe with me just for a second. I know it's weird. I know it feels like we could be using our time more effectively, but let's tell our bodies you're safe. Let's engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is sometimes called the rest and digest one. And we're just gonna, this is a YouTube video you could get, breathing exercises. It's a 3-minute video and I'm not gonna take that long, but let's do maybe 30 seconds of breathing together. And what you're gonna find is it's gonna ask for us to breathe in and hold and then exhale. And the exhale is longer than the inhale. And that's on purpose because when you exhale, that's your body saying, rest, digest, you're okay, everything's fine. So will you breathe with me for a second? I see some people saying that that they've used some apps and things similar to this. If this isn't your thing, just like if this isn't your student's thing, nobody has to participate. But this is just brain science and nothing too strange. But even if you don't feel comfortable, please don't feel like you have to participate. Okay, let's start a video. Okay, so you notice it says breathe in and then rest and then breathe out. So I invite you to do this with me and rest. And now breathe in, hold, breathe out and hold. And then breathe in, hold, breathe out. And you see how that breathe out is longer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, but you could do the full 3 minutes. Again, if you're like a type A, constantly going personality, sometimes it's really hard to do that. But it's good for your brain, and it's good to it makes your learning and your instruction more effective because you've taken the time to get students into the right mindset and you're not overloading their brains with all of this stuff. So part of engaging practices is having brain breaks. One other thing I want to say real quick, because I just forgot to say it earlier, is you can also, if there's a time that's appropriate in your lesson, you could have scheduled times if you're online to do camera off time or video off time and say, okay, we're gonna all work on this activity for the next 5 minutes, and I'm going to encourage you to turn your cameras off during this time. Now that can be really scary because you don't know what they're going to do if their camera is off. But if you can find an appropriate time where that could work in your lesson, then it just, again, they're not having to look at their own self for those 5 minutes. Or you can instruct them to how they can rearrange their Zoom screen to where they're not constantly looking at themselves. And it's like that's a natural thing, is for us to gravitate towards looking at our own image. It's fascinating to us. But it's just something to be mindful of, that it can be overwhelming, especially if you're teaching like 2 and 3 hour classes. Okay, so part of that is brain breaks, Zoom fatigue, all of that. The other part of engaging practices, which is our second signature practice, is having engaging instruction. So not what do you do when you're not teaching, but what do you do when you are teaching? How do you make sure that you're thinking about your students' social and emotional needs in your instruction? And so even when the lesson is not specifically on social emotional learning, that lesson can still foster collaboration, cultural responsiveness, and self-efficacy. Now, in the TESOL world, we're actually really good at this because we have done a lot of research and understand that a lot of the things that are good for language acquisition, cooperative learning structures, communicative language practices, things like that, role plays, group projects, mini debates, discussion, class discussion, small group discussion, that those are the types of things that we already know are going to facilitate language learning, are also good at social emotional learning. Because you think about, in a lot of this practice, you're going to have some sort of collaboration, relationship building, social awareness. You're building those skills kind of into the lesson, whatever it's about. Cultural responsiveness. You think about if you're doing some sort of mini debate or even listening to someone else's perspective on a topic that you may or may not agree with. learning about other people's cultures and their perspectives is an aspect of social emotional learning. And even if you're not teaching how to do that, you can have instructional strategies such as a debate or a role play that those skills are kind of inherent in the instruction. Also self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a part of self-awareness. And this is so important for English learners, especially adult learners. One of the things I think ESL Library is doing that's just cool, that kind of ticks the self-efficacy box, is this English with the Washington Post. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's cool where learners can actually read real Washington Post articles at their level and engage with that material. This fosters self-efficacy because, first of all, it's tailored towards, it's something that an adult would do anything, read the news. I mean, that's the first thing I do in the morning is read the news, often the Washington Post. And so it makes them feel good about themselves, which fosters that good self-image. But it also gives them a chance to do some reflection as well. So I wanted to show you just one of the lessons that's there with English with the Washington Post. It's about Simone Biles. And you remember with the Olympics recently, Simone Biles was having some issues performing, and there was a lot in the news about her mental health and just mental health in general. And so this lesson, there it goes. I wanted to show it to you big. If you go in, the student can actually read. This is an intermediate level text, I believe, about, Biles and her mental health. And then the student can go down and do a personal response. And the question is, have you ever quit an activity in order to preserve your mental health? Why or why not? And then the student can record their answer and reflect. And so this really is targeting that first aspect of SEL, self-awareness, because it's not only helping them to feel efficacy, because they're able to read, the news, but it's also self-awareness because they're reflecting on whether they personally have ever been in the same situation as Biles. So our practices, our teaching practices need to be engaging because the way that we structure them can help target social emotional learning. Okay, so we've done 2 practices. The first one was welcoming rituals. The second was engaging practices and opportunities for brain breaks. And then the third and final practice is what we call optimistic closure. So concluding with something positive and uplifting. I know that as a teacher, I sometimes get so focused on just trying to, sometimes I overplan and I have too much prepared and I'm trying to get through the lesson. As students are packing up to leave, I'm thinking about homework and all these different things. But really, for social emotional learning, the best way to conclude a lesson is to have an opportunity for some kind of reflection, something positive, something uplifting. Again, this doesn't have to be a long thing, but just as you started with something positive, saying, I'm so glad you're here, let's connect with each other. It's also ending in that same posture. So one way that I've seen a colleague do this, I believe this is Katie Topple's work over here on the left, if you know her from Twitter. Her class does affirmations at the end of the lesson where they say just some positive things. I am bilingual. It's a very positive thing to say. I am brave. I'm smart. And the students actually came up with these themselves. I can do hard things. My voice matters. Just some positive messages to pour into these kids who are, and this is a K-12 class, who are doing the work of learning a second language. Sometimes this can be sharing gratitude to another classmate who's maybe helped you throughout the day, or maybe you learned something that you want to just thank them. So there could be opportunity for that. Or sometimes it can be just what's one word that would describe your learning for today, or one word that you would say is how you're feeling as we're leaving the classroom. Anything like that. The optimistic closure can look a lot of different ways. We're going to do an optimistic closure here in just a minute as we round out our time together, but I wanted to talk about just a couple of other things real fast before we do. When you hear about social emotional learning, there's kind of two names and two theories that are attached to those names that you hear quite often. And so I just wanted to mention those. One is the work of Carol Dweck on growth mindset. Growth mindset is something where, Sesame Street is playing here. The growth mindset is this idea that our ability is not static, it's not fixed, that our ability is developed and dynamic. And so if we currently are struggling in learning English, or we currently are having a hard time with a particular skill, that is not our fate, that's not our destiny. That growth mindset is saying, I haven't mastered this yet. I'm going to embrace the challenge. I'm going to persist even when there's obstacles in my way, instead of just giving up or seeing, why even try? The person with a growth mindset recognizes that their current state is not their final state. And so when we talk about SEL with English learners, we want to use this power of yet in our own classrooms. Now, this isn't something that when I was growing up, that was talked about a lot. But even in Sesame Street, this is a common theme, is growth mindset and the power of yet. And while I don't know that you would want to be showing Sesame Street to your learners, so that's up to you. This gives a good example of how this is being taught to our kids. And yet sometimes we as adults haven't fully embraced this idea. So I wanted to show you a brief clip from Sesame Street.
Well, I'm just going to go play with Elmo's ramp.
Oh, hold on a second. Any great engineering project is going to involve some trial and error. It's not that your ramp doesn't work, it's just that it doesn't work yet. That's the power of yet.
Ooh, oh, Mr. Sir, is that like a superpower?
Kind of, Elmo. It's a superpower that we all have. It's the idea that mistakes aren't bad and that we learn from them, so we keep trying.
But I tried my ramp twice already.
Well, what did you try differently the second time?
Nothing.
Well, why don't we look closer and see if we can try a different approach?
Okay, so you get the idea. They're going to change up her design, and she's ultimately going to be more successful. But she's learning the power of yet, that just because you run into obstacles doesn't necessarily mean that you can't. It just means you can't yet. And there's a fun song that I'm going to skip called "The Power of Yet" that Bert is about to sing there. This growth mindset. How do we get this yet concept into our classrooms? Well, one way is to just explicitly talk about it, to talk just like, I just explained now, to explain the brainology behind it, that our brains are muscles and that we can exercise them and grow them, and that we are capable of changing and learning and growing. Just because something isn't true today or something isn't working right now doesn't mean that it has to be that way. A really practical way I see this happening is providing alternatives to I don't know. So if you have students that say, I don't know, part of establishing that culture and climate in your own classroom can be saying, hey, in our classroom, we're not going to say, I don't know. Instead, here are some other things that you could say. May I have more time to think? Please reword the question. May I ask a friend for help? Could you please explain it differently? So you're helping them to say, it's not just, I don't know, I give up, but how can I proactively continue to get help so I can know? You could have this posted as a chart in your classroom. Up here at the top, we have one teacher that just has these as posters around the word. Instead of I don't know, what does the word blank mean? I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you rephrase it for me? So giving them that language so that they have some alternatives to I don't know. That builds in that yet. Also, you using the language of yet, you yourself, the teacher, using the language of yet is really important. This is a self-assessment as part of one of the ESL Library lessons. And you see, as the student is going through trying to figure out, can I say and write many types of food? The options are yes, very well, yes, with help, or not yet. It's not no, it's not yet. That's a really subtle, important difference that says to them, I believe in you. You need to believe in yourself. We're going to go from not yet to yes with help. It will happen. It can happen. Likewise, the last thing I wanted to mention is Angela Duckworth is the other name. So you have Dweck and growth mindset. You also have Duckworth and grit. Grit and resilience are kind of key words that you hear when it comes to social emotional learning. I just want to say with English learners and SEL and resilience, I'm sure that you found this to be true with your students. English learners are exceptionally resilient population. It's an asset that they bring into our classroom. Down here, it says typical immigrant strengths include deep and broad family ties, an abiding faith in the value of education, and immigrant optimism. That immigrants are bringing into our classrooms these assets, and they've often gone through very difficult immigration processes, have had lots of life experiences and prior schooling that they're bringing in. And so when we talk about grit, it's not so much teaching our students to be resilient, but leveraging the resilience they already have. Okay, so, and I also want to just mention, it's hard to do SEL well when you're not taking care of yourself. So be sure that you're engaging in some self-care practices. This can look like a bubble bath and hot tea or something, but it can also be just you being mindful of your own emotions. You thinking about, okay, what energy am I bringing into this room? So it can be just some of those own self-awareness techniques. So be willing to look within as well. Okay, in our last couple of minutes, I want to do one more Mentimeter. So if you would go back to menti.com, it's the same one that we were just at. And if you will use the code, the same code as before, it's 601-4693. We're gonna, if you log in right now, it's probably seeing that other, the previous question. So let me go switch out to our next question. And our next question is what is one word that describes your learning on SEL today? So we want to end with our own optimistic closure. And so if you would, what is one word that would describe your learning today?
Can you give us the code one more time?
You bet. It's 6011-4693. And it's right up there at the top of that screen. Oh, good. We're getting some great words. Thank you. I see inspired, insightful, illuminating. Ooh, you guys have such great vocabulary. I love it. Excited, yet. Ooh, love it. It's a powerful word. It's a 3-letter word, so small, and yet there's so much power in it. Self. Ooh, muy bien. I see some other languages. Wonderful. Reassuring. That's a beautiful word. Edifying. My goodness. This is like a language thing and a SEL thing at the same time. I love all of your great words. Like a thesaurus. So thank you as you're bringing in those words. We have about 5 minutes or so for questions, comments, thoughts. I'd love to know what you're wondering, what you're thinking. Let's see, I see this question on the screen that has a link. Let me see if I can pull up that link. There was a question about, someone had posted a link about passive music listening and engaging the limbic and paralimbic systems. Interesting. I don't know about that, but that sounds really fascinating, Tina. I really appreciate you bringing that up, about what is the brain science behind bringing music into the classroom. That's what I would have to read the article. That's what I assume that's about. So thank you for that question. What other questions do we have? Oh, Tina's saying it personally works for me and was wondering if anyone at ESL Library has implemented it as a teacher. Yeah, if anybody here has utilized that in their classroom, please hop into the chat and let us know. How can we use the self-assessment part effectively in class? Oh, such a great question. I actually do a whole other presentation on self-assessment because it's a big question. But yeah, I think part of giving students agency, again, that self-efficacy, feeling motivated. Again, we talked about with the affective filter that low motivation can lead to ineffective learning. And so part of motivating learners is shifting it from the teacher trying to do everything to motivate them to shifting that responsibility to the learner, giving them agency over their own learning. And so a self-assessment is, in essence, asking the student to reflect on their own learning. Where are they in that process of, mastering whatever it is that they're going for, whatever the objectives are for that particular lesson or unit. And so, so I think with a self-assessment, first of all, it's creating one if you don't have one. So obviously, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. That one from ESL Library was a good example of what one looks like because it used an I can statement, I can, and then very clearly what is it that the student should be able to do. And it's in student-friendly language, so they know, okay, this is what I'm trying to aim for. And then the targets, the yes, I can do this independently, yes, I can do this with help, or not yet. And the student is having to think about where do they think they are. Now, self-assessment, obviously you want to pair with other types of assessment like formative assessment so the teacher can also figure out kind of where they are in the learning. But the self-assessment is really for the learner. It's for them to reflect on how they're going in their journey, and recognizing that learning is a journey. And it's not just I can do this, I can't do this, and if I can't do it, I don't make a good grade and we just move on with life. But that's not really what learning is. It's checking to see, I can, whatever the statement is, and then am I there yet? Am I not there yet? And if I'm not there yet, what do I need to do to get there? Hopefully that helps. One more minute.
I think we have time to answer this last question on the screen.
Yeah, SEL and behavior. There is a lot of research on these things, and you actually will see in K-12 environments a lot of behavior management programs are starting to recognize this type of research, the social emotional aspect, and are using it as a way to address behavior issues. I think about there is one in the K-12 system down here in the States that is called Capturing Kids' Hearts, and it utilizes a lot of these SEL principles as a way to do behavior management in a much more in a less punitive way, in a more holistic way, in a way that really helps students to be in touch with their emotional selves. So I think there's early evidence that it is helpful with behavior. Certainly, sometimes a lot of behavior issues come out of being bored, not being engaged, not feeling connected, not feeling that the learning is relevant, not feeling threatened or overwhelmed. And so recognizing the social emotional aspect of learning may, as a byproduct, it may positively impact those behavior issues. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm sure some people are wondering, how can they contact you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you if they have further questions? Or we've posted a link in the top of the chat to the blog post where they can learn more about you, and that may have some information.
Here's my contact info. It's coming up on the screen. It's a little tiny, but you can find me at Twitter at Dr. Katie Welch, or you can email me at katie@welcheducation.com. I would love to talk with you further about these issues. And as we go, I just want to thank you for your work. Thank you for the student, for engaging with the students that you're working with. Thank you for carrying forth in a very difficult year when it's a hard time to be a teacher. We appreciate you. So thank you for all that you do.